Bo 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 bo. Anybody? Tailspin? Nah. Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be going ahead and taking a look at this lovely Grumman Goose. How to get it started, kind of how to fly it around, some of the handling quirks and things that I found with playing with it. We should right now, of course, be somewhere on the island of Manhattan / Long Island up there in New England in the United States. But I brought it down to the Caribbean today because, because science. I guess technically it should be Morocco. I forget exactly where that takes place. And yes, I know in the original Tailspin, they actually did not. It was a twin tail, and it was like an amalgamation of different aircraft. Anyway, so the Grumman Goose is a really, really slick plane. It is an amphibious aircraft, and it does a lot of things really, really well. And it also has a lot of kind of fun little, I guess I want to call them quirks. And unfortunately, even though they gave us a wonderful model of this over in Flight Sim, they didn't model everything in it. For example, if I float down here, you have this incredible device for the purposes of doing nothing. With little switches and stuff like that don't do anything. And then when you float over here, you've got these little rheostats that don't do anything, which hopefully they change that in the future. But one thing I love about this aircraft, even before we get it started, is if you actually go in the back, like they took the time to model all this, and look at this, they even have a toilet. Oh man, that is so smooth. I've never actually needed to use that on the airplane virtually, but it's kind of cool. Anyway, enough said, let's get this thing started. So this aircraft is a big old twin. It's an amphibian. It means the big twin engines are up top, which also makes this thing super hazardous to taxi because it wants to flop. And, of course, we're conventional landing gear, which just makes things more fun for us as far as that goes. Now, the checklist that they give us is pretty straightforward. It's a relatively thing. I got a couple little pieces I do a little bit differently. I did do some research on this aircraft, trying to find like an original pilot's information manual on it. And they do exist. They're just a little, I don't know. They're almost not helpful. You know what I mean when you look them up. So let's go ahead and do it. So first things first, we got to get fuel in this thing. Pretty straightforward. We have a big fuel valve behind our heads. There's two different fuel modes we can do. We can do the left tank or the right tank. This is for both engines. And of course, if you're curious how much fuel you actually carry, you have this little sight gauge here. The way this works, you have a little valve and you'd open it up and it would let the fuel through and kind of pop through real fast there. So just as an example, if I grab my weight and balance real quickly and I do one of these things, see how that little ball is sinking there? So you can see when this gets down to this point, I've got about, 27, 28. That should be about 30 gallons of gas right there. So it actually reads really, really well. And I appreciate it has like the caution zone and then it has the we're out of gas zone. So keep in mind each side of the aircraft has its own version of that. You can actually float over here and see this one too. And obviously we'd have to do that. So the next thing we know is if you look directly behind your head, you have the engine cutoff valves. Now this is an old school style valve. If you actually look, the valve needs to line up with the pipe. So right now you see how the valve is just sort of chilling on its own, even though it says off. If I click on this, do you see how the valve and the pipe line up with each other? So that's going to allow fuel to actually flow through. Now, already getting you nice and confused here. If you take a look, this is the actual valves that go up and over to the engine. The actual system where we get the fuel itself through comes through. Haha! Remember this guy over here? We can actually follow the pipe over here. And you can see the way that it splits, and it actually gives you a little bit for the fuel and all that. The other thing we need to keep in mind is you have this manual fuel pump kind of chilling in the back. There is no electric fuel pump anywhere on this aircraft. It has an engine-driven pump, which of course complicates things because the engines are up there as opposed to underneath us. So gravity is not our friend here. As a matter of fact, if we stick our head up here real quick and take a look at our two sets of instruments, you're going to notice the fact that we have no fuel pressure right now, which even if I turned on the batteries and everything, it's not going to do anything for me. While we're up here, by the way, we're going to go ahead and make sure the propeller control is set all the way up. We're also going to go ahead and make sure our ignition is set on. This one's pretty straightforward. You're going to click the magneto all the way forward, and you're going to make sure that big thing that says pull off is not set on. So I'm going to shove it all the way like that. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mixture handles. It's the old school. You have to go click, push in order to get them into position. It's click, push. And of course, if you need to adjust the tension, that's what that thing's here. Throttle, this is pretty old school engine, so you just got to crack the throttle a little bit. And that should be enough to basically get us ready to start. Like I said, not a complicated aircraft in any means here. Floating down here, we're going to take a look at our different options. We're going to turn on the beacon light first, which is our beacon. Pop on the generator and the battery. You probably said, how come nothing came on? It did. I swear. Things are working. If you take a look really carefully, you can almost see nothing because there's really not a lot to this particular aircraft when it comes to stuff on the outside. So that is all set. The first thing we need to do is get a little bit of pressure. One thing I'm going to do real quickly, though, is I'm going to lock the tail wheel. You also want to confirm the fact that the brakes are in a set position here. If I go ahead and click the brakes, do you see how it has this little like hatch, this little lever here? You'd actually stick the brakes down, and this little arm would come down and grab the brake. Yeah, yeah, I could definitely set that parking brake in an emergency, I'm sure. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure I could set it. Also, I like how the guy on that side doesn't have any brakes. Neat. So we're ready to get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the manual fuel pump and just going to give this a couple quick whacks. It really does not take much in order to get the fuel pressure built up. You can see we have about 7, 8, 9, 10. That's plenty. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to engage the starters and put your hand on each individual controls. Once it catches, give it just a little bit. Once it catches, and that's it. We're going to give it just a little bit. We're going to start warming up at about between 800 and 1,000 RPM is kind of the sweet spot there. Like I said, not a lot of drama with this aircraft. It is a generator aircraft and not an alternator aircraft. That simply means that if we don't run high enough RPM, what's actually going to start to occur is you're going to slowly start to discharge your battery. It's just kind of the nature of these old beasts here. Right? That's about 1,000 right there. That's looking pretty good. Warm up is pretty straightforward. Now we have our cylinder head temperature. Keep in mind this is in Fahrenheit, so most of you think 200 is a high number. That's not really high for us. Ideally, we want to be right around between 300 and 400. I like how there's not even a red zone in this one, which is just mind-boggling for somebody who flies. Yikes. Coming over on this side, obviously we don't have a lot of oil temperature, but we do have oil pressure. And also notice that our fuel is showing that at pressure on both sides, so we've got more than enough. Carb temperature right now is 20, which is Celsius. Is plenty. Once it gets around like 4 or 5, then you got to start worrying. Coming over to our ammeter here, if I take a look at it real quick, you can see that we have plenty of volts here. Obviously, if you push the button, that's going to give you your volts. So that's 25.5 volts. If I push the button again, that's going to go ahead and drop it down, and we're pulling about, that's not quite a bit of amps actually. It's 40, that's 60 amps. Holy smokes. Theoretically, if I pull the throttle all the way back, nah, they didn't model the generator. Oh well, it's no big deal. Like I said, the rest of the plane is quite cool. All right, we got this thing all warmed up. One of the things I never understood about tailspin is reaching up above your arm to engage the throttle. Like, I don't know about you, but like when I'm in landing mode, sometimes I need to like grab this if it's like a flare, but I don't know. That freaks me out just a little bit. So now we're in the warm-up phase. The aircraft is all set up. We don't need to set anything. Like I said, we want to be about 1,000 RPM. The throttle is not very responsive on account of the fact, like I said, this thing's a little old-fashioned, so it's going to be a little bit jerky for you. Everything else is good. Like I said, we got 300 degrees, so that's plenty. Floating backwards here, temperature's in the green. Yeah, we're ready to rock. So taxiing this thing on the ground is pretty simple. We do have a steerable wheel in the back, which is easy, assuming that you opened it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discharge the tail wheel lock. I'm going to go ahead and tap it. And as soon as you do that, this thing gets going immediately. So obviously, be very, very slow with this. This thing wants to flip itself over. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a couple little taps here. Nothing too excessive. Like I said, just a little tiny bit here. You don't want to get ripping here. Ooh, as soon as I look away from those engines, all of a sudden I'm doing 1,600 RPM. Holy smokes. And we're just going to kind of line ourselves up here. Now notice there's not a lot of drama as far as, this thing bouncing all over the runway or anything. This thing is certainly not a Cessna 185 or anything scary like that. But it does have a tendency to topple itself, so you got to kind of be careful with that. All right, that looks pretty good there. We've gotten ourselves into position. Engines look pretty solid. Again, it's really, really fun to try to maintain the RPM, especially with flight simulator controls. In the real world, of course, these needles wouldn't be nearly that steady. They'd be all over the place as you're sitting here. All right, that looks pretty darn good. I'm doing one little check here, just kind of some mental things. This is an old school DG, so one of the problems you're going to have to do is you'd have to reset this. In Flight Sim, all you do is you tap the D key. Do you see how this thing twisted a little bit? Every once in a while, bop that D key. Otherwise, what's going to happen is this is going to slowly process because it's like an old school gyro, and eventually it's not even going to point in the direction that you want it. I love the instrumentation here. We have an up and down. We have an airspeed indicator. Keep in mind, our airspeed indicator is a dual zone here. You've got yourselves your miles per hour. You've also got yourself your knots. Generally, for this one, it's not the world's fastest, but it will get you going pretty well as far as that goes. So now that we're all warmed up, I'm going to take a look at my last couple things here. It looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and do a run up real fast. Park and brake set. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up, not too high here. Obviously, we're almost to our maximum temperature of engines, so we don't want to overdo this. Bring it up to, it should be about 1,700 for these old guys, these old radials. And that looks pretty good right about there. Perfect. So what we'll do is go ahead and exercise the prop. These are the old stool props. Yep. Give it a couple little pulls just to make sure. Wow, that's a really responsive prop gauge. I'm super impressed. Play through our magnetos here. Ooh, I have to change that magneto. I've been meaning to do that. All right, come over to this guy and we'll do the same thing. Very, very nice. The other thing, of course, we like to do is you like to grab that carb heat lever. We're just going to go ahead and pull it and see what happens. You should lose a few RPM, which we did. Slap that back to the cold position. We also want to confirm that the temperature heats up. And now we're good to go. Always pull it to back, see if the engine wants to cut out on us. Nope, we're good to go. So now we're ready for takeoff. So takeoff in this thing is interesting. The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that tail wheel is locked. Obviously, we're taking off from the line. And that thing is we have this lovely little rudder trim thing, which is actually reversed. If we want to rudder trim left, you have to actually roll your mouse the other way. We'll deal with that in flight. So takeoff, very, very straightforward in this aircraft. This is one of those that it wants to fly, so you just want to kind of keep that in mind. Another thing you want to watch out for is the flight sim default view is lined up with the horizon, not like this, which is the actual nose of the plane. So just kind of be mindful of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring our power up to about 30 inches, which is going to be whatever the field elevation is. This is a great way to check to make sure both engines are behaving. About 30 inches is about atmospheric pressure. We should be getting about 2,000 RPM plus or minus. I think this is 50. That's plenty. I'm going to go ahead and release the parking brake, and I'm going to go smoothly increase this up to 35 inches, and that's our limit. So when this thing takes off, it tends to get a little loose on you, so kind of be ready for it. Again, I'm not applying any pressure other than right aileron. You can see that very, very clearly. And you're going to need quite a bit of right aileron in this thing. Fortunately, I positioned my microphone in just the right place, that is smack on the top of my controller. And there we go. A liftoff speed on this one is about 100 miles an hour is where you got to get up. So we're going to keep going until we've run out of runway here, which looks pretty good. I don't think we can land it. Plus, we're an amphibian. We're going to go ahead and slap the gear up option, which is really cool because if you actually, I'm not going to see the little handle that you have to crank to do that. And now we're airborne, just like that. So the first thing you're going to notice is during the initial climb here is the aircraft is going to have a tendency to kind of go all over the place. It's just kind of the nature of this beast here. But now that we do have a little bit of altitude underneath us, I'm going to go ahead and take our turn. We're going to be traveling northish today, kind of heading for one of the other islands. We're going to be setting down the water just for the purposes of demonstrating that as well. So again, not the greatest visibility, but I mean, it's cool. And you know this thing's all metal, so it's going to be loud as far as zipping around. Kind of come to my right a little bit here. Oh, yeah, that really resists those right turns. Perfect. So we're just going to climb up just a little bit. Optimum climb speed for this one, right around 100 to 120. Obviously, you could do full open throttle here, which is what we have, or wide open throttle is what they always say. It's watt. But of course, that's going to depend on how needy your climb is. This aircraft does have a turbocharger on it, so even though we're climbing, you're going to have to slowly apply forward pressure on the throttle in order to maintain the same amount of manifold pressure. Now that we've gotten a pretty good amount of room under us, we're going to go ahead and do our power reduction here for our climb. I'm going to go ahead and bring us down just a little bit. Looks pretty good. And we'll go ahead and pull the RPM back as well. Remember, things go wrong when you make changes. All right, that looks pretty good right about there. Perfect. Now we can just continue at about 100, 120 miles an hour, and that's going to get us climbing up pretty nicely. I'm getting about 700 feet per minute, which is actually very impressive for an aircraft of the era. But again, we have these two gigantic radials, so it doesn't surprise me at all. As you're climbing, things we want to keep an eye out for, obviously, looking up above my head, are P's and T's, and you can see we're just a little outside the temperature range of the engines, which means we could probably bring back the manifold pressure. Everything else is good. Cylinder head temperature is beautiful, which is exactly where we want it. We would not want it to be at ugly. Like I said, it's a slight difference in temperature there. And our destination is right over there at 12 o'clock. Now, when this aircraft was originally developed, the idea here was that this would be the young executive plane. This is a thing that, after you had a long day of playing around on Wall Street, you climb aboard this thing right there, take off from East River or something like that in New York and basically fly up, to Connecticut of all places. Who would do that? Or, of course, you could fly up to Long Island, kind of stop by the whatever place that you have and things like that. And it was always kind of a neat concept to just sort of imagine that, you do this in an aircraft. So we've got about, let's call it 300 feet or so to go, and we'll go ahead and level off. Now, where the aircraft gets interesting is when you try to get the plane trimmed. And I'll show you exactly what I mean once we get up to 2,500 feet here. Again, perfect speed, about 100, 110, 120 is pretty good for cooling. I'm going to come to my left just a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. Slowly bring the nose down. Remember, your point of view in this tail dragger, because of Microsoft, is actually like this. It's not like this, which is the default. So if you wonder why it seems like you're pitched up or you're pitched down, it's because of your head position. That's more of a flight sim thing than it is anything. All right, so as we start to pick up speed, the aircraft is going to develop a very strong left-turning tendency. We'll go ahead and build up the last couple feet. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and reduce our power first. I'm going to go ahead and pull this thing down. We're going to come down to atmospheric pressure at about 25 or so. And we'll go ahead and reduce the RPM to about 2,000 RPM. Nice. That's going to be a very nice, very, very controlled cruise. We're not going to be going too fast. We're not going to be going too slow. We're not going to be chewing through our fuel very, very aggressively. Now, there's no automatic pilot on here, and all navigation is going to be done completely visibly. So right now, I'm just kind of looking off of that island off in the distance, and that's my visual reference point. So when we go to trim this, as always, you want to start with your elevator trim. I'm going to go ahead and press and hold here. Get plenty of blasts of elevator trim. And that looks pretty good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to aileron trim. I'm kind of just about perfect. You can already see I'm still pulling this control to the right. All right, looks good. We're going to start wonking on the aileron trim. You're going to need a lot of aileron trim in order to get this thing to be balanced there. All right, It looks pretty good. Come to my left just a little bit on the aileron trim, and I think I've just about got it. Let go. No, we have a slight left tendency still. And a couple of taps of up trim, and we're good to go. As soon as you look away, by the way, you'll be turning. Yep, you can see I'm turning already. That's what happens with the aileron trim. By the way, another thing you want to watch out for is, see how it's got this curve? Your horizon, you've got two bubbles here, so your horizon's actually not terribly helpful here. This indicator over here is probably going to help you out. All right. Looks pretty good, looks pretty good. I'm not going to touch it because the moment I touch it, the aircraft, of course, is going to come out of trim here. And this works pretty well. We're about 2,500 feet here. We're cruising more or less perfect here. Like I said, a little tiny bit of down trim and we should be fine on it. With a good time to go ahead and check my fuel. Obviously, I don't need to swap fuel tanks at this time because, we're just kind of going. It's a relatively short flight for us, but obviously when we're coming in for a landing and everything, we want to go ahead and think about, what are we going to do as far as fuel tank and all that. We'll deal with that in a moment. Oh man, I've got tailspin stuck in my head so bad right now. Oh, never going to get out. Another tailspin. Anyway, so now we've reached our destination. We're going to be landing in that little bay right down there and kind of taxiing our way right up to the shore. So descents in this aircraft are very similar to descents in any high-performance aircraft. Basically, we want to try to keep the engine going without overspeeding the aircraft. Now, that's easy because watch this. I'm just going to stick the nose down, and that's it. This is our descent. Because this aircraft is basically a gigantic boat, when we start a descent like this, it's not really going to cause us to speed up much. Matter of fact, if you take a look down at our airspeed indicator, we're doing about, 135 knots. That's nothing. One of the aircraft that I fly in the real world now is a Mooney 20, and I've descended at 220 knots. Like, that's just routine. Obviously, I need a bit of a tailwind to help you with that, but you get my feels. So we're going to go ahead and descend by not reducing power much. Whatever we set it to earlier, we're just going to kind of leave it at this particular time. So I'm at 25 and 20. That's plenty for a giant radial like that. And basically, we're going to be doing a water landing. Now, this aircraft has kind of a strange behavior during water landings. In the real world, when you hit the water, it slows you down fast. There's very, very little, I don't want to call it drama because there's always quite a bit of drama whenever you're doing a water landing. But the key thing here is it gets very, very stiff. Now, you'll see what I mean when I go ahead and make my landing. Now, what we could do, of course, is we could land at that runway there, but we're actually going to basically taxi our way under the ground to park at that runway. And you can actually see where that little dirt road is right there. That's going to be our ultimate terminus right there, so we can kind of just drive up onto the runway so we can take back off again. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle back a little bit. You want to keep your power over 20 until it's basically time to commit. Kind of go over this little valley right here. I've been to the Caribbean a couple times. I've been very blessed. And these little, crazy switchback roads are the most terrifying things you'll ever see. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and begin on my little base turn here. We've come down to about 120. Approach speed on this thing is pretty variable. You can usually do about 90 to 100 miles an hour. Seems to be pretty smooth. Obviously, once you start bringing the flaps in, it gets a little interesting for us. So I'm actually going to go start my turn to final here. Looks pretty good. I'm going to slow them down just a tiny bit here. Good time to do your Gunfels checks. We're going to go ahead and switch fuel tanks. That looks pretty good. Switch into the cooler fuel tank. We're going to go ahead and smoothly increase RPM. It's going to help give us a little bit more slowdown too. And there's our objective right off our left here. And we're going to get less than 120 miles an hour here. Nose up. And then just going to bleed off a little bit of speed here. That'll do it. Go ahead and pop those flaps now. So the flaps on this aircraft are what they call split flaps. So if you actually look at the bottom of the wing here, you see how those flaps are break off the wing, but they leave the top of the wing flat. Oh, found a sunken ship. The problem with that particular technique is it causes a tremendous amount of drag. That's a good thing for us because we need to slow down. The bad thing for us, of course, is when you do get to that kind of high drag stage, when you're about to kind of settle into the water, it tends to pull you into the water. So we're going to be doing a nice glass water landing here. It's pretty straightforward. It looks like we're coming a little fast. I'm just going to kind of let the nose up. We're going to pull the throttle back. And basically what we do is I call it like the glass water or the carrier landing. So you're just going to hold it up. The plane is actually lower than it looks. We're not going to try to flare. We're going to just stick the back part of the plane into the water, and you don't want to pull up too hard when you do into the water. It's going to be a pretty hard splash. There we go. There we go. Just ease it into the water. Nice. That's the sound it should make, but it doesn't. I'm a little disappointed with that. Now, some of you are immediately going, well, wait a minute. What if you wanted to go ahead and, notice, by the way, I landed into the wind. What if you wanted to try to go ahead and steer in the water? Well, if you can see, I can work my rudder all afternoon, but the aircraft is not going to engage in any sort of turns for me whatsoever. That's not how we turn this thing in the water. The way you turn it into the water is actually with differential thrust. So if I wanted to do a quick donut in this thing, I could actually apply just the right engine here, kick my left foot over, and that's usually more than enough to kind of get us going. So the problem with steering with differential thrust, for those of you who are new to this particular technique, it's actually pretty patient work. You don't want to just jam on it and kind of hope it sorts you out. You want to give it just enough to turn you out, and when you start to come out, it's really critical that you give it a blast to that other engine. Just straighten yourself back out, and you can see how I was using the two engines separately here. So what I'm going to do is skip up to the beach. That was easy. And now we're just going to beach ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and now slowly approach here. Of course, in the real world, there's a whole process. There's a ramp that you're supposed to use to do this. But this is just kind of a fun thing. So now watch what happens in Flight Sim if you try to deploy the landing gear while you're in the water. Ta-da! I feel like I should be singing the James Bond theme as I kind of pull myself out of the water here. Disengage the tail wheel lock. And now we're just going to basically pull ourselves right up onto the beach. Remember that little road I was telling you about? There it is. Nice. So obviously in the real world, that is not an approved procedure. Obviously we're in a flight sim, so we can have a little more fun than that. Yes, damage was turned on, by the way. So I did not actually cheat to do that. That is a feature, not a flaw. But we did crash into that tree and explode. So even when you do attempt things like that, watch out for that. Other than that, enjoy.